My name is Bo Keely, and I'm in Slab City. I was raised poor. There was one Christmas present in our stockings. There was never enough to eat. I was hungry every day until I was about 18 years old. I had a string of jobs that paid from 3 cents up to 25 cents an hour throughout childhood. But I always kept in mind what Abe Lincoln said, work hard and one day your chance will come. My chance came when I caught my first freight train, and it led down a lot of bends of the rails through 400 freight trips to Slab City. I moved here 8 years ago and haven't had a regret since then. So follow me to Slab City. The freights led me to a place called Sand Valley, which is just over the bombing range, 25 miles east of Slab City. There I homesteaded. I still have a 10-acre property with a deed. I brought in a motorcycle with a trailer and a little camp trailer, and for 15 years, sweat and toil, I built it up. Then one day, 8 years ago, in 2014, I returned from a trip and it had been razed. Everything was burned, firebombed, stolen. It was no place to live anymore. I tracked, in fact, I caught two of the slab brassers. A brasser is a person who scraps the range. I've done it plenty of times myself. The scrappers, in this case, they didn't get enough brass to fill their pockets, so they went into the next valley over where I live, Sand Valley, and they robbed me and a number of the other residents. And I returned to smoke and ashes and my things strewn all over the yard. 2 motorcycles burned, my car, my old 2001 Ford Contour, pulled off the blocks, and that was it. So I returned to my property, and there was nothing left to live for there. I walked down to my neighbors. My nearest neighbor was a mile and a half away, and caught 2 of the slab thieves in the process of robbing him, and chased them across the bombing range. I had a plastic squirt gun in my pocket, in a rail, went to 30 miles, across the Chocolate Mountain bombing range, past the targets and the 6-foot bombs buried in the ground, and came out on Coachella Canal Road, where on the road I lost their tracks, and that was it. I liked the look of Slab City and decided to settle there. I got a rent-a-car, rented by the month, from a Chevy Spark from Hertz. I got a rent-a-car from Hertz, a rolling motel at $20 a day, and for the first 2 years in Slab City, I camped along the Coachella Canal. So I arrived in Slab City in 2014 in a Chevy Spark rent-a-car. It was $20 a day, rented by the month. It sounds expensive, but it was my rolling motel room. I car camped up and down the Coachella Canal, from Slab City at the library, drop 7, down 6, 5, all the way 10 miles from Slab City to the south to drop 2. Each day I would go out hiking. I'm a nature guy. I would track the animals. I discovered springs. There were no other hikers out, but there were brassers. I tracked them. There were illegals, polio from south of the border. I tracked them. I tracked people tracking me, and got pretty good at it. At night, I slept wherever I parked my car. All the while I'm doing this, for the first year, I'm looking for the things that were stolen from my property in Sand Valley. $80,000 worth of things, all my life belongings, were taken. And I got to know a few of the people in fact, a lot of the people who were primarily from the underworld. For my first year to 2 years in Slab City, I thought, well, everybody is a criminal here just because I was tracking my stolen things, and those are the only kinds of people I met. Was interactions with the Border Patrol. Now, I had been a sub-teacher in Blythe, California for 10 years, and I always promoted the Border Patrol, demoted the customs, which that is immigration along the border, which to me is corrupt. But Border Patrol agents, I told my students, it's something you might want to aim for. You're outdoors, you get to track people, and it's just more of an honest living. I thought that before I moved to Slab City. The difference in Border Patrol agents in other places and in Slab City is where the action is. And unfortunately, many of the Border Patrolmen fall under the stress. I tracked them, they tracked me, we tracked each other, tracking each other. Let me give you a couple examples. I was sleeping one morning along the Coachella Canal at drop 3 outside the Chevy rent-a-car, and I heard a buzzing over my head. It wasn't a horsefly, but it was a Border Patrol plane. They had spotted my car parked in the desert and assumed that I was smuggling illegals from the border and making a spiral closer and closer in until they were about 100 feet above me. I turned over, it was about sunrise, thought I've got about 45 minutes response time, laid there waking up for 5 minutes, and then got out as the Border Patrol continued to spiral in the plane above me, and decided not to take water, just a hat, stuck on my ankle weights, and walked east toward the Chocolate Mountains. The response time was, I knew they were going to call the main office up in Indio and send down trucks, quads, and whatever they needed to catch this so-called smuggler. I wasn't smuggling anything. I was just waking up to take another hike to the Chocolate Mountains. I started walking east. As I walked east, I got a half mile away from my camp on the Coachella Canal, and the Border Patrolman had a choice in the airplane. He could keep circling in my camp to give directions to the arriving Border Patrol truck and quads, or he could follow me. He decided to follow me, and he circled me as I kept walking at about 2 miles an hour overland toward the Chocolate Mountains. Now I was about a mile away when the first Border Patrol trucks arrived, and then another one, and quads unloaded. The problem the Border Patrolmen had, I could hear their engines, but they hadn't showed up yet. The problem the Border Patrolman had was he couldn't direct them to the exact spot unless he was circling over it, but he couldn't direct them to me unless he was circling over me. So as he circled over me, I made and turned back to where his buddies were arriving. I made a right angle turn into a wash and vanished from their perspective. He directed the Border Patrolmen from the air to where I had been, and they took off in that direction. I was about 2 miles away at a time, and now taking a right-hand angle. So they arrived there, but I had gone over hard pan, and they couldn't find me. The Border Patrol airplanes circled, and whenever he was above me, pointed at me, I hid under an ironwood or a Palo Verde, and whenever he was going the other direction, I took off. Over the course of the next 2 hours, they tracked me, and I tracked them all the way back to my original camp, where they finally gave it up. They parked there, and I watched them from 100 yards away load up their trucks with the quads. The airplane took off. It was probably a $10,000 operation, and they went home empty-handed. There were a dozen other incidents involving hands on guns, them tracking me tracking them. I got to know their supervisors in Indio and in Yuma so well from calling in their incompetencies that I told them I was a gonzo reporter on the Border Patrol, that they began to defer to me. And on the calls to him, I told to the supervisors, I would tell him, well, the score is now 6 in favor of Bo and 2 in favor of Border Patrol. That is, they hadn't caught me 6 times and I had tracked them, and they had surprised and caught me 2 times. If they don't have a quad, if they only have a 4-wheel drive Border Patrol truck, then it's very difficult for them to catch me, because all I have to do is backtrack over a hard pan. I can climb a tree. I had shoes, soles mounted backwards on my own boots, so it looked like I was walking the same direction. Really, they didn't have much of a chance. In another instance, I can't say was really me, but it was a guy who looked like me. Out Beale Road. Beale Road, as you know, continues from Niland to Slab City, and then across the bombing range. In fact, it continues past through the Chocolates and threads around to Sand Valley. Along Beale Road, 3 miles south of Slab City, there's a cutoff road that goes right south to a military base called Speedbag. And at that point, the Border Patrol had mounted a camera in a Palo Verde tree. And this fellow who looks like me got a buddy and went out one sunset. The buddy, who looked like Popeye the Sailor, climbed the tree with a pair of wire cutters. He was a veteran scrapper and a local. He knew what he was doing. He said, all I need is a pair of dike pliers. He climbed the tree. He removed cut the cable. He removed the camera, which was about like this, and turned it around, turned it upside down, and said, here I am, come get me. And then I knew we had a response time of about 20 minutes, because for something like that, captured on camera, up in Yuma, they would call into the checkpoint on Highway 111, 10 miles north of Niland. They would call into them, and they'd send their agents down. Sure enough, in 10 minutes, the place swarmed like a hornet's nest. By that time, we were half a mile away. I knew the desert better than my buddy from hiking it so much. I said, first we're going to cut across the washes. We headed directly south rather than Slab City, so that their quads would go up and down. I said, up and down the washes make it difficult going. I told them they'll probably have night scopes whenever they're pointed at us or stopped. We'll duck down in the washes. So we walked 10 minutes south and then cut west, to Slab City, and arrived in Slab City in the late evening. My buddy took, that is the guy who looked like me. His buddy took the camera to one of the locals who knew how to dissect it, and it was an expensive item. He moved the GPS tracker, hopefully before they tracked the camera to his place, and that was he moved the GPS tracker, and the Border Patrol was none the wiser for it. My interactions were not only with the Border Patrol, but with the Imperial County Sheriff's Department, dozens and dozens of times, and they began to regret it. I know how to fill out legal paperwork and deal with Babylon and bureaucracies, so that's how I became the Phantom of Slab City. By that I mean I investigated their investigations, and then filed reports with Internal Affairs down on Appleseed and El Centro. Internal Affairs is the police of the police. If you have to make a complaint to Internal Affairs against a deputy, that's your first step, and it's simple. You can do it by phone, or you can do it by a simple one-piece sheet of paper. If it's something serious, then always go out of house. Go to the DA for that county, or call up the feds, which I've done at the Sacramento Department or in Washington, D.C. In any case, I became the Phantom of Slab City. I got deputies fired, their wages garnished, transferred, and thoroughly embarrassed. Some of the things that I filed complaints on were the beating of Little Joe. The two deputies were chasing him for throwing a rock at their car, and they beat him unconscious in front of many of us witnesses, and then they tasered him while he was unconscious and continued to beat him with their fists and kick him dozens of times until he ended up with the hospital, and now Little Joe is no longer with us. Cut for a minute while I think. It's very difficult for the Imperial County Sheriff's deputies in Slab City. Slab City is like their training ground. I've been to Imperial Valley College and taking fire science and other courses, and helped these young people on their multiple guest tests, and they're at a great disadvantage. Their perspective, which is proper, is in most communities around the country, there's one way up and out of a poor neighborhood, and that's through sports. You get an athletic scholarship. In Imperial County, the main way up and out to a new life is by joining law enforcement. So typically they go to Imperial Valley College and get a criminal justice degree. Any barber, clerk, fast food helper, they have criminal justice degrees. They have their applications in with Border Patrol, Imperial County, deputies, with immigration, with Highway Patrol, and other law enforcement agencies. Now, once they become a deputy at in Imperial County Sheriff's Department, they work for 2 years and then get the heck out of this county where they can make some real money and not have to deal with the likes of people in Slab City. Across the board, Slab City residents have a much higher IQ than Imperial Valley deputies. Slabbers are in the majority ex-cons and confidence artists. And that's one of the reasons for the success of Slab City, perhaps before you moved here, was there was no source of income when I moved here. I had the only car, I was the only guy who delivered ice, there was no beer, there was no weed was very hard to get. The only sources of income were scrapping the range and the only sources of income were scrapping the range and methamphetamine. It was a white economy, not a green economy. The change from white to green occurred about 3 years after I moved here in 2016, 2017, when a different type of people, the green people, the weed pickers, the rainbowers, the homeless people moved in, for better or for worse. While I was a Phantom of Slab City, I printed up thousands of little sheets of paper that said how to outfox the cops, and left them all over the guard shacks, the bulletin boards, down at the hot springs, the ladders at the canals, telling people how to call internal affairs or how to call the feds in very serious cases, because there was crime. Cut it there. Okay. Are you there? Oh. Yeah, that's good for that. Besides, other than the Border Patrol and the Imperial Valley deputies, I also had many interactions with the military from Camp Billy. Camp Billy is a main training base for the Navy SEALs, Special Forces, and other elite soldiers located about 6 miles north of Slab City along Coachella Canal Road. My interaction with most of the Marines was out in the desert. I would hike from the Coachella Canal to the Chocolate Mountains, and sooner or later bump into a Marine patrol or them into me. It was hard to tell if I was trespassing because their line of signs are all bleached out. They were always pleasant, and the U.S. Marines are very, very good. They've snuck up on me a couple times and appeared out of nowhere. The way they do it is one man pops up and said, good morning, sir. Then as he engages me, 2 more pop up on either side of me from behind bushes, and 30 seconds later, a whole group of 12 will surround me. And are you all right, sir? Do you need anything? And we'll have a good hike. Very pleasant, very capable people. In one case, in the summer, I was hiking down near Drop 3 where the sand dunes are. A warm day, had a straw hat on, trekking across the sand, and I heard a whir above me, and it was a helicopter. It got closer and closer and landed 50 yards to my right. I looked over there wondering what's going on, and a Marine in full uniform, full arms, stepped out, and he's carrying something in both hands. He runs at me, and I'm looking at him, and he comes to a stop in front of me and says, "Courtesy of the U.S. Marines, sir," and handed me 2 bottled waters, ice cold, turned around, went back, and I have a fond spot, and I have a fond spot in my heart for the U.S. Marines since then. We didn't get off to such a good start, however. The people, the slabbers who had robbed me in Sand Valley and took all of my life treasures and work. Starting again, you can edit that out. You gonna start again? You gonna stop it? No. Just on that part, you're gonna edit out 5 seconds. Yeah, just 5 seconds. I didn't get such a good start with the military when I first arrived. The reason is that when I had been robbed by slabbers in Slab City, actually not only had they sent the sheriffs out to investigate the robbery of my place and other residents, they sent out the military. I knew the military knew, the CO knew from Camp Billy exactly who the slabbers were who robbed my place, that I've since identified. But they wouldn't tell me. So I put a chain around my neck that had been on the van, the semi-truck van that they had cut to get into all my valuables over in Sand Valley. I put this chain around my neck, drove my Chevy Spark out to Camp Billy and parked at the gate, walked in, and of course in Camp Billy, the gates sometime open, The gates sometimes shut. It's surprising for Special Forces Desert Training Camp that, that security is so apparently lax. I walked in with the chain, and immediately a young Marine walked up to me and said, may I help you? I said, I'd like to see the CO. What's it about? He says, I told him, my container and your containers also on the other side of the bombing range are being broken into. And I can tell him how to prevent that if he'll just give me an audience and tell me who it was that robbed my container. He said, you won't be able to see the CO, but I'll see what I can do. He disappeared into a hut, came back with 4 other men, and they made a semicircle around me and said, what is it you want to do? I said, I want to trade information on how to avoid slabbers continually breaking into your containers at your bases on the range and stealing your electrical and cots and wiring. I want to trade that for the name of the person that robbed me, because they're using the same MO. They're cutting the chains or pulling it off with the truck and then just entering the vans. So he said, and exactly where is this where is this that they're breaking into in your place and our bases? So I scratched with my toe on the ground a map, and as I started to do that, they saw I had ankle weights on. When they saw that, they ducked and covered. They rolled to the ground. They thought I was a suicide bomber into explode the gate, and we had a laugh over that. They wouldn't let me see the CO, but I had a recourse. Out on the bombing range, there are 2 vertical mine shafts. There's a lot of mine shafts, horizontal, vertical. This is old gold mining country. There's a lot of gold in those hills, dating back to before the Spanish came here. However, more importantly, there are 2 vertical mine shafts with people's bodies in them. In early times, before I moved here, the deputies used to bring culprits out to Slab City and say, there's nothing we can do about this guy. We don't want to lock him up. The other prisoners will kill him. You take care of him. And in a number of cases, they handed him over to a fellow who's still around, who's called the hanging judge, and he and another fellow would take care of them. In some very grotesque ways, but in this case, they would drop him down the mine shaft and let him stay there without water, then drive out every couple days and piss on it so that he would have water and stay alive longer, so that he would suffer more for the crimes that they thought were so atrocious. And I wanted to go out to those mine shafts to film the bodies down there. Of course, they were now just skeletons. They were blue jeans and shirts, and about 20 feet down. But I had a camera with a trident hook on it and a reel, and was going to lower the camera down, take pictures on the bombing range of dead slabbers murdered by people because the deputies had dropped them off in Slab City, and trade that information for the name of the people who robbed my place. That didn't work because my quad got towed. So that was the end of the plan, and I never did recover in that way my things that were stolen from me, which included cut it after the things that were stolen from me. Okay. For the first 2 years in Slab City, then, I was still trying to recover my stolen things. They included I'm sorry, you're okay. I'm gonna start again.
Yeah?
Yeah, no, you're right. Okay, starting again.
You want to start again?
No, yeah,
I could just edit it.
you can just edit it out.
Yeah,
if you want.
edit
Yeah.
it.
For my first 2 years in Slab City, I was still trying to recover my stolen items from my homestead over in Sand Valley. There were some very important things. I didn't care about my generators and laptop computers. All I wanted back was my baseball card collection from childhood, my mother's gold locket, and a project, the materials from a project I was working on that I'll describe in just a minute. So in the first 2 years, I combed Slab City and got to know the underworld. There are a couple of reasons that I fit in immediately with Slab City. First of all, I became the legal and medical advisor for the #1 family in Slab City. Second of all, by coincidence, I had known, it turned out, the mayor of Slab City when we were kids back in Michigan. The mayor, as you may know, is Ben Nutty. This is how I came to meet him out here. Someone told me, go ask the mayor where your stolen things are. I said, where does he live? Across from the range. He said, go up to the gate, yell Nutty, 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 and he'll come out. Or Mariah, his wife, will come out. And they're very friendly. I went to his gate, Nutty, Nutty, Nutty. Yes, what can I do for you? I said, I'm looking for some stolen things, and people said that you're not necessarily the man who stole them, but you're the information man. He said, yes, I am. I've been out here since the 90s, and I know a lot that goes on. I might take a commission or charge you, but that's how I live. I said, well, what's your name? And he said, Ben Morawski. And I said, well, where are you from? He says, I'm from Michigan. I said, the only Morawski I know from Michigan was from Lansing, Michigan. And he says, is that right? Well, my dad had 3 PhDs from Michigan State University. I said, well, I have 1 PhD from Michigan State University in veterinary medicine. Nutty said, well, my dad fed goats quarters and nickels that you probably dissected during surgery, during large animal surgery, to practice. And I said, the only Morawski I know that did that doesn't have 3 PhDs. He was a 3-time loser. He was a genius criminal in Lansing, Michigan. He was he could walk in and take over any town, any prison. He would dress up in a tuxedo and walk into 5-star Hyatt hotels and others. And he was also a forger, and he would have a forged business card that said U.S. Treasury Department. Go in on Friday when the weekend staff started. My name is Mr. Smith. Here's my U.S. Treasury business card. We've had reports of counterfeit $100 bills in this area. Can you please show me yours out of your cash register? And the clerks would pull them out, hand them over to Mr. Morawski. This one's fake, this one's real, this one's counterfeit, this real. He says, okay, here's the real ones, here's the counterfeit ones, keep my card, and if you suspect finding any more counterfeit bills, give me a call. And that's one way he made his living for many, many years when I knew Ben Nutty's father back in Michigan. Ben Nutty's father ended up in Traverse City, the asylum for genius criminals, on top of the roof, casting on a fish line chicken parts off to catch seagulls to sell to the inmates. He was still turning money. He was still doing well, in the same way that I had originally met him, which was when in Lansing, Michigan, way back in the 80s, when he loaned me his old VW van. Now, Ben Nutty at the time, your mayor in Slab City, was only 8 years old. That's right, I know Ben Nutty when he was 8 years old. I'm older than he was. His dad loaned me his beat up VW van while he worked on my blue Chevy van. One evening I was driving that van and came to a railroad tracks, hit the brakes. They didn't work. I coasted into the middle of the tracks. Out from behind a building came a freight train. It hit the side of the van, actually on the passenger side. It hit the side of the van, bent it into a V, scooped the car up onto the cow catcher, and carried me about 200 yards down the track. It takes a while for a train going 20 miles an hour to stop. I was holding onto the steering wheel, looking down at the railroad ties going by, click, 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 waiting to fall under the cookie cutter wheels. But the train stopped before that happened. The engineer came out, "Are you okay?" "Yep." The girl I was with, blonde, had conked her head against a passenger window and been knocked out. We revived her, and then the engineer said, "The first thing we need to do is clean all the beer cans out of the back of this van because the police will be here in 10 minutes. I said, "They're not mine." He says, "It doesn't matter, let's clean them out." We cleaned it out. Make a long story short, Mr. Morawski ended up making a few $100s on that by having me testify to the adjuster that it had been an accident, and he collected the money on that. Morawskis were always good at turning a coin. There were some other things about your mayor, Ben Nutty, that you may not know that are impressive, actually. Mostly his father, actually. His dad was called the human computer. He challenged the Michigan State University computers, where I was taking computer science, besides being in veterinary medicine at the time, and he beat the computers at mathematical problems. The family had a band. Ben Nutty's family, the Morawskis, had a band that preceded the Partridge family. They were very good. They backed up at the time. I'm gonna have to start this again for you to edit it first. No, it's okay. You're just gonna edit that part out. The Morawski family had a band that was very good. They were supposed to take the place of the Partridge family. They got on the Jerry Lee telethon and got to the finals. Unfortunately, in that performance, they played their songs at the end of the set. Everybody clapped except for one principal character, and Mr. Morawski, Ben's dad, walked up to him and punched him in the forehead and broke his glasses. However, that ended the Jerry Lee telethon and the chance of worldwide fame. However, they did back up Help me on this. Who sang Johnny Be Good?
It's,
The famous singer? Chuck Berry. I got it. Although they lost the Jerry Lee Telethon, they did go on to back up Chuck Berry. I used to live in a music studio where Berry recorded and in fact went on the road with them and was the band psychologist. The Morawski family backed them up at the first 8-track studio owned by Bob Baldori in Lansing, Michigan. Okay, I can't remember what I was. Oh, okay, I got it. So I arrived in Slab City and I was immediately a made guy. People vouched for me, especially in the underworld. One reason was because of Ben Nutty, the mayor, and the other reason is because I became the medical and legal advisor for the #1 family at the time in the town. Actually, their headquarters was called The Ranch, located across from the gas station in Nyland on the west side of 111, a bunch of palm trees, fenced-in area, a video camera. You walk in and there's a picture of an old ranch house, a lot of outbuildings. And I got to know the Don, the main, very well known, the best known slabber and area resident very well, because I had given Miss World runner-up her first orgasm. This is how it worked. I was a racquetball champion, and during that era of my life, in the golden era of racquetball, I did a clinic for Sports Illustrated in Michigan, in which they had appearing by my side in a practice game for the cameras and the magazine, Miss World runner-up. And I beat her with a tennis shoe. You always use a left shoe because then you get a better backhand. And she was pretty, but she was easy to beat in racquetball. And then I asked her out on a date. We went to the back of McDonald's parking lot in Lansing and made love in my Chevy van. And that led to me meeting many years later in Slab City, the #1 family. When the family Don heard that I had given Miss World runner-up her orgasm, he wanted to meet me. And I wanted to meet him because all stolen items end up at a fence, and the fence is usually one of the family that sells illegal articles. So I got to meet him and we got along very well. I started doing his medical with him and his family in Slab City, Nyland, and down in Calpat. Got to know all of his principals, his brothers, and I started, as importantly, doing his legal stuff in the limitations of doing his complaints against deputies. Now, the ranch of this fellow in Nyland was on the hottest road in Slab City. The police patrolled it all the time, but they could never catch them because they were hooked into them. He was hooked in. The police could never catch him because he was hooked into them. They was hooked into him, and life went on. I'm going to have to edit this just a bit. I did Ratman. Oops, cut that. I did the Don's, the #1 guy's legal work for him and his family, and especially for his workers, in the limitation of doing his legal complaints against the deputies that were filed and went to internal affairs, and they got some results. They would tow his car illegally. We complained to Internal Affairs. That copy went to the DMV, and the DMV got hold of Internal Affairs that told their deputies, leave this guy alone. In another instance, the deputy came out and scraped the update sticker off the license plate and then ticketed him for having a late license plate. Things like that. The cops beating his boys for no good reasons. In doing this, I got close to the head man with the goal of getting my things back from that had been stolen over in Sand Valley. The three, and we'll cut it there. Or you'll cut it just before that last sentence.
All right, that's fine.
Go.
There are two faces to Slab City. The first face is what you're more familiar with, likely, and what the tourists see and what's written about in the media, and that is Salvation Mountain, East Jesus, and the music range. The other face that actually controls Slab City and comes alive each night and sometimes bumps around during the daytime. The other face of Slab City is the underworld. There are three primary facets. One is the biggest recycling operation in the country, which is scrapping the range for brass. For many years, brass scrapping was the primary source of income for Slab City. The second is methamphetamine. This is a sort of methamphetamine capital of Southern California. Slab City has a tradition with drugs back to the Hells Angels that has gone from marijuana through the cocaine era and now into the meth era. And I could tell you stories about refrigerator loads of methamphetamine, hundreds of pounds being dropped off, and border stories and so forth, but that's not for this video. The third aspect is running illegals. We're on a pipeline from Mexico up to Mecca near India, a pollo pipeline. Pollo is a Mexican word that is commonly used down there for the illegal aliens. For every illegal alien you read about that the Border Patrol publishes, 10, perhaps 20 get away. Let me divert for a minute. I know illegal aliens probably better than illegal aliens. Better definitely than the Border Patrol. I've hopped freight trains on La Bestia. La Bestia is the famous freight train that you find all over the internet. A movie has been made. Sonia has written Pulitzer Prize winning Enrique's Journey. La Bestia is a freight train that runs from the Mexican southern border at Guatemala up to the US border in California, Arizona, and Texas, and then they cross by foot into the promised land, USA. I've boarded at the Guatemala border and ridden segments of it about 8 times with thousands of illegals, mostly from Central America, predominantly from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and of course there's a few Mexicans en route. It's portrayed as a very dangerous journey, and it is because en route, and I've seen it with guns and poker sticks, the Central Americans are illegal aliens within the country of Mexico. Therefore, they're chastised and pursued and extorted, just like the Mexican illegals are here in the U.S. So in Mexico, I'm on a freight train, on top of freight train, a half-mile train with hundreds of Central Americans. And it's a moving town, day after day, rumbling along the rail, branches brushing the top, through quasi-jungles, through little towns, with umbrellas made of branches, card games going on, little shops aboard the freight train with hundreds of people, families, but primarily the riders are 20 to 30-year-old Central Americans. The way it works is they make their way on La Bestia, which takes a full month of travel from the Guatemala border across Mexico to the California-U.S. border. It takes 1 month of riding that dangerous freight train. Then they cross into U.S. and they make good money. Instead of making $1 an hour at sparse jobs in Central America, now they're making $15, $16 an hour. They save it, they all send it home to their hometowns in Central America to finance 1 or 2 more people up on La Bestia. I've stayed at the Casa de Inmigrantes, where hablo suficiente español, where the freight train riders from Central America stay. I've stayed all along the Mexican borders where they stay in the motels. I've crossed with some of them. I'm not a coyote. I'm not a person who smuggles pollo or illegal aliens. I just accompany them for the adventures and to have the stories. And one story is getting caught in the middle of the Rio Grande, me and a couple of Central Americans by the U.S. Border Patrol. They just detained me for a while, and they did more than that to the Latins. I've written a book called Executive Hobo, Writing the American Dream, in which the last chapter is called Latin Like Me and describes what I'm saying about riding La Bestia freight train. It's very difficult and dangerous for Central Americans because the Mexicans are out to hurt them, to extort their money. But for a gringo like me, and sometimes I've taken other people, including women down there, we're made on the freight train. They don't bother us. I get invited in by the military in command of the railroad crossings. The engineers invite me into their engines because I've never seen another Caucasian riding the rails in Mexico. So that's the other facet of the 2 faces of Slab City. Remember, the first face of Slab City that everybody sees is Salvation Mountain, East Jesus, and the music range. All very good things. The face of the underworld that people aren't aware of is Brassing the Range. What was the other one? The other face of Slab City, the underworld that people aren't aware of, is Scrapping the Range, the methamphetamine trade, and on the illegal pipeline from Mexicali up to Mecca. What they do is, anybody who's been around Slab City for long enough, so this is no secret, there are 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 people with quads or vehicles who pick them up at certain places along the border and smuggle them, usually on quads. It's a nighttime operation. Some of them wear night vision goggles. They take 1 person per quad, the smart ones do. They never take drugs such as meth, marijuana, and heroin with the package. They're called the illegal, and they don't take pregnant women. So they start at the Mexican border, they go along our chocolate mountains and they curve in and land the illegal aliens up in Mecca in the multiple citrus orchards. I've been up there at some of the places where they're happily working off their debt to pay for that $1,000 trip from the border up to Mecca. And then from there, they, after their debt's paid off, part of it is they get a ride to any place in the country they want, often to LA, Colorado, Texas, Chicago. A lot of them go out of there to the deep south. Once they get there, they have contacts, or on the street, they very easily get a fake ID, a fake green card and a fake driver's license, and they're all set. They work for 100 of them. They work on this side of the border and another 100 on the other side, south of the border. They work for a few years, making enough money to send back again to their homeland in Central America to finance more illegals entering America. Okay, and cut that. Let's see, what I was starting to talk about for this facet was, what was the title of this one?
Leonard Knight.
Oh, yeah, okay. Good, I'm good. The big draw to Slab City is Salvation Mountain. It's very important to the county because it's the biggest money-making attraction in the county. I've known some of the managers, and I knew Leonard Knight back 15 years ago. A lot of money is put in that little concrete box that was supposed to go to Slab City to help the town that doesn't make it. That isn't the topic of this discussion. The topic is the secret life of Leonard Knight as he related to me 15 years ago. 15 years ago, still in Sand Valley, 25 miles east of here, that is just across the Chocolate Mountain bombing range, nestled up against the Little Mule Mountains, was my 10-acre homestead. One day I stepped outside my trailer and walked across. It was a Sunday, so they weren't doing much bombing. When jets flew over, I hid under mistletoe in the Palo Verde trees and walked 30 miles. It's 25 miles as a bird flies, but 30 or 35 miles as one goes up and down and around to the Coachella Canal. I swam the Coachella Canal, then walked right up to Salvation Mountain and introduced myself to Leonard Knight. Leonard Knight is the now famous deceased proprietor of Salvation Mountain, and he deserved all the attention he's getting. He looked a little bit like I look now. This was 15 years ago. In fact, he double took when he looked at me. He says, "You look just like my brother." I said, "Well, I've just walked 30 miles to see you." He says, "Is that right? Well, let me tell you how I got here." And this is what he related. He says, "I was from the Northeast, a young man, and decided to go west, young man. And I hitchhiked, made it as far as, I think he said it was Kansas, ran out of money, and got a job in a material factory." He said, "I was at the sewing machine all day. Then at nighttime, I started gathering pieces for my dream. The pieces were materials of cut cloth segments. Some were as little as 5 feet long and 3 feet wide to up to 3 yards long and 5 yards wide." He started saving all these to patch together his dream. That dream was to make a hot air balloon made from these patches, paint "God is Love" on it, launch it in Kansas, and ride the air currents, advertising his belief in God and in love all the way to the Pacific Ocean. He said, I got off the ground and the material was so heavy that the balloon faltered, the basket crashed lightly. I put it into storage and made other plans. By the way, that balloon, he said, is now in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm gonna wait for this train to go by.
Good?
I'm waiting for the train whistle to, no, you're good, it's only 3 more seconds. You don't
Okay.
Audio good?
Yeah.
Okay. When Leonard's air balloon didn't make it, he hitched the rest of the way and got as far as Nyland. He got a job behind, in a little room behind May's grocery store, and did janitorial work. He saved his nickels and dimes and dollar bills and bought paint. The reason is he had spotted a bluff of clay up 3 miles up the road, up Beale Road, going west, that he knew was weatherproof and would hold paint. He thought, if I can't take the message of love to the people in the air, I'll have the people come to the mountain. And that's what he did. He started painting Salvation Mountain, and he painted it all the time, even through the summer. He was painting the day I walked up on him. He says, and that's my story. That's why I've built Salvation Mountain. Okay, that's that one.
Okay. Cool.
For a while I had to scrap the range. I was over in Sand Valley and Babylon froze my bank assets for some reason I didn't understand. So whenever you live near the Chocolate Mountain Gunnery Range, the biggest bombing range in the country, you have ready-made capital in the form of brass spent shells and aluminum bomb fins, especially brass. People don't fool around that much with the bomb fins. I used to go out primarily on foot. It's always a nighttime operation, or it should. I was much more careful about it than most of the slab brassers. Even on Sunday, I wouldn't go out. The only other time was one day out of the year on 2 days, on Thanksgiving and Christmas. But typically, after 10 p.m., the military stopped strafing in jets, shooting out of helicopters. And when they do that, it's with machine guns that fire, I can't recall, up to maybe 20 rounds a second. Shells this long, as well as infantry on the ground firing smaller calibers. But primarily, I was looking for at the targets, at the air targets, the brass from the bigger shells. That's without the head. And on a good night, I could pick up by foot 30, 35 pounds worth $100. With my neighbor, J.R. Taylor, who was a former Sand Valley resident, called the King of the Brassers, that you could read about on a cover story in the LA Times, called The Ethical Outlaw. He would take, and took me out a number of times when he taught me how to brass the range. He would bring back up to $1,000 worth of brass on one night. That would be about 2 Jeep loads in a homemade rail. But I just went out by foot with a knapsack, and the typical scene is I would ride my motorcycle up to the bombing range within a half mile of the target being wooden tanks, cutout soldiers on posts. There's old railroad tracks on the Chocolate Mountain bombing range, just 6 miles east of Slab City, where I've also walked to brass, is the airport, and behind it the town. And then there are the other bigger targets, Little Baghdad, Killer, and other popular spots. But by foot, I stuck to the targets that were just around the fringe of the bombing range. One night, we're okay, I think. One night I was scrapping the range on foot, and there was a blinking red light approaching. That's always the key of a helicopter. That cued me that I had probably tripped a pressure sensor, and they sent in the helicopter from one of the bases to see what was going on. I can't advise people to scrap the range. It's illegal, but it's cut that part out. They sent out a helicopter to check on me. As soon as I saw the red light coming, I knew that they have a front end infrared sensor. They can see a jackrabbit says at a quarter mile very clearly, the hairs on its ears. I ducked into a ravine, into a little washed out cave, covered the front with rocks so that my body wouldn't give out any infrared heat. And as the helicopter hoovered over looking for me and actually started strafing the hillside, I was protected. He stayed there for about 10 minutes, and then he dropped what are called ladder flares to try to catch a non-infrared visual on me. These ladder flares, the first one he lit off, I was in my little cave like a hobbit, and I could have read a book. It was so bright, the flare being about 1/8 of a mile up. It covers a half a mile, and you could easily sit there and read a book had not have been blocked in by rocks. He fired a few more shots, took off. I gathered my shells, because the first thing you do if you think you're going to be chased by the military or border patrol that is sometimes on the bombing range is to toss all your shells, and then you just say that, well, I was hiking and got lost. The other important thing to remember is never pick up a live shell. In other words, a round with the head still on it. That's called live ammo. It's a felony. You immediately get taken to jail and will get a few months at minimum if it's your first charge, and if you have a vehicle, they'll impound it. However, without live ammo, with just the brass shells that are about the color of this, it's like an Easter egg hunt. You go out on the side of a hill, and it's just a misdemeanor if you get caught with anything other than, and then they say, well, get off the range, don't come back, fine. And then you come back if you like a couple of days later. The brass, which is the color of this paint, makes it like an Easter egg hunt for gold eggs. You'll have an alluvial fan with a jet or a helicopter that has strafed the target, and when they do this, the helicopter or jet is moving and ejecting at, say, 20 rounds per second, all kinds of shells, and they fall down, tinkle, and litter the ground, so you can follow a path of these and collect hundreds in a few minutes if you find this vein and fill your knapsack in 15 minutes. Other times it takes all night of walking just to get a few miserable shells. Other times you'll find a mother lode, which is where some helicopters have nets that catch the ejected shells. They take them away from the target and they dump them, and I found a pile of them worth a couple $100 in the desert. So I replenished, until Babylon unfroze my bank account, I was able to exist over in Sand Valley for a while. I got over here and don't scrap the range very much, but have walked out to the airport 5 miles east of Slab City. Those are those silver containers you see directly toward the Salvation Mountains. They're mounted horizontally, double stacked, sideways, with windows cut in it along a path. It's called an airport because I've been to plenty of Central and South American Latin airports, and it looks, from overview, it looks just like a little town, single street town, or an airport from aerial view in the distance. From up close, these hundreds of old semi-truck vans, containers, are riddled with millions and millions of shell shots. So I've gone out there and picked up brass, but more interesting for me is, by the way, the brass is brought back to Slab City, and there used to be someone down on First Street who accepted it. He pulled it and then would drive it to certain recycle centers in Yuma and San Diego. They also used to accept it in the old bank building in Nyland, accept used brass, but then the feds came down on them and closed that operation. Now the brassers still pool it, but I believe they go either to Arizona or over on the way to San Diego. I do it for fun rather than to make money, because on foot it's very difficult. I've been out by quad and by Jeep too, a little bit easier, but somehow it takes the fun out of it. I like to hike along and look for the glitter of brass gold. The other thing I look for out there is a double strand detonation wire. This is a thin double strand wire that's been used back to World War II and to trigger, to detonate explosives. In other words, the soldiers get out there, they dig a hole, they plant the explosives, they run a detonation wire for a quarter mile up to, I've walked and collected 3/4 of a mile long. They hide behind in their own dugout berm, blast it, and when I had my enduro dirt bike, whenever I heard a blast like that, I used to get on it and drive out and collect detonation wire. I've also collected it by foot. One night I walked out to the airport. It takes about 2 hours to get to the airport, 5 miles from Slab City. And on the way, I found so much detonation wire, I thought, well, I can start selling this, and I can use it too. It's useful for all kinds of things, such as tie downs, as fence, and if you tried to sell it online, and could get a market, it'd be very expensive stuff. Cut out that last part. Let's see where one night I went out to brass the airport, and I found so much double strand black detonation wire en route that I started, I don't want the brass, I want this wire. So I started, what you do is you find a strand of it, which will always go at least 1/4 of a mile, and you start pulling it out of the sand, depending on how old it is, and some that's a decade, 2 decades old, but still pliable and very high quality stuff. Some of it has gone through and plants grown around it. I would walk along and you wind it around an elbow until it gets, till you've gone about 200 yards and it starts to feel heavy. Then you cut it with a pair of dikes, if you have them, or chip away with a sharp rock, leave it there, walk, collect the next one, until you have loops like lassos of double strand wires. And I walked back to Slab City with probably 60 to 70 pounds of this draped on my arms and legs and around my neck and waist like Magneto Man, and then actually did a pretty good, it was a seller's market at the time, and sold it to some slabbers. What was the topic of this? Oh, scrapping the range. Let me think if there's anything else. No, that's good on that.
Go.
I was the Iceman of Slab City the first year I was here. I had the only running vehicle, the Chevy Spark rent-a-car. There was one lame quad. People had to walk to town, which was a defeating purpose, because on their way back with ice, it would all be melted. And there's actually a case of a guy I know who walked half a mile. He collapsed at the railroad tracks by Nyland, but he had the foresight to have a $10 bill in his pocket that he pulled out, and as he's laying there semi-conscious, he waved it, and somebody picked him up. Everybody carried a $10 bill in their socks at that time. Usually it wasn't for that purpose, but was to make themselves happier for a few hours on the dreadful summer. I trained scientifically when I was over in Sand Valley. Remember, I've been out here for 25 years, and my first 3 years I arrived, I drove my old Contour with the heater on during the summers, so that when I stepped outside into the desert floor, which was 150 degrees in the sun, it was a breath of cool air, relatively speaking. So I do pretty well by the heat. And anybody who comes out here for the first time can look forward to this. The first summer is horrid. Your body is slowly adapting. Just drink lots of fluids. The second summer is uncomfortable. At the end of the third summer, you have tremendous cellular changes that have taken place. You breathe differently. Your skin is differently. Your lung lining, your blood vessels, everything's changed. You're adapted, and you're ready to live in the warm weather. Here's a couple very important tips that have been ignored every year, and every year they cart them off to the hospital for the same reason. I'll put down my credential on water. I've studied it for years, written published essays on it. I've walked the length of Baja California, most of the Pacific Crest Trail, Vermont, Colorado, Florida, looking for water sources, and studied it and had it in nutrition classes. That is all to say, in summary, don't drink the nylon water. It isn't the bacteria you're worried about, it's the additive to it. You can put that nylon water, as I have, on tomato plants. It'll turn them yellow. It's not fit for dogs. I know it's a hardship, and sometimes there's no other water to drink, but what happens in the summer with the first heat, your water volume intake goes up 3 to 4 times. You're drinking 2 gallons a day of that bad poisonous stuff. It makes you sick. The ambulance, it makes you real sick. Remember, I was the Iceman. I went from trailer to trailer and saw the ghastly faces on these poor people crawling to their door. Ice, water. Every day at sunset, people would come to their trailer doors and windows, have the strength to yell out, water, water. It just wasn't around. People didn't deliver it. So what happens is, if you drink the nylon water, you end up going to the hospital. The hospital says, well, you have kidney problems. They usually diagnose. Of course you do, because it filters the bad particles in the nylon water. They tell you to come back to Slab City and drink more water. And then you end up DOA. And the coroner attributes it to heart attack or heat exhaustion. It happens many times every year, especially on the hot years. in my initial very hot year, when I was the Iceman, I stuck a couple sleeping bags in the back of the Chevy Spark, bought ice at the gas station, and delivered it to the seniors. I couldn't afford to go around and drop it off at everybody, but ice and some water to some of the seniors. And the people that were suffering greatly and courageously. One guy, I can name him now because he's passed, probably for the same reason. His name was Dwayne. He lived in a few places. I used to bring him ice, and he used to say, "Thank you so much, Iceman. I owe you. You don't owe me anything. You've suffered. Your karma has earned this. Enjoy your ice." One day, I didn't have my Spark anymore. I had my motorcycle. I continued delivering ice. I could carry 5 bags, 5 8-pound bags at a time. I drove up to Dwayne's trailer across from the hot springs. My motorcycle had a tire problem before I got the ice. By the time I got to him, I was a couple hours late. He came out and he was so heat stroked. He said, "Where have you been? I missed the ice." I said, I had a vehicle problem. He pulled out a 9mm and he shot it over my left shoulder, and he said, "It's not worth living anymore." I said, "Calm down." He raised the millimeter again and shot it over my other shoulder. He said, "I could be happier in a Mexicali jail." He said, "I could be cooler as a mental case in a prison on the 5th floor." He says, "I'm not sure this is worth it anymore." And he raised the gun again, and I said, "But you have ice." And he lowered it, and he said, "You're right." And he went on to live for a couple more years. Okay. Yep. I'm a fixer in Slab City, a movie fixer. That means I've brought in National Geographic, CNN Paris, Vancouver, Hollywood. The biggest, most interesting one was a week-long filming of a novel, based on a novel about Slab City. A fixer is a person who is the local contact. I was unpaid, but it was a blast. In the case with CNN Paris, he had contacted me to do a freight train story, riding the rails of America and out of Slab City. He flew in from Paris, came to Slab City, and I said, "You don't need to go anyplace else on the rails. There are plenty of stories here. Just drive around in your car for a while and you'll see." And he ended up getting a 5-year resident journalist visa for here in Mexicali. He went out on the range and scrapped. He did Jumping the Wall at Mexicali, feature, Casa de Immigrante film, and other stories. Slab City is in the future, it will be a media heaven. What a lot of people don't know, the media and tourists alike, is there's a county airport in El Centro, so you can catch a bus from from here to that county airport or vice versa, and it connects El Centro County Airport to LAX. So if I wanted to travel to another country, I've been to 105 countries, though not since I moved to Slab City 8 years ago. I just catch a bus down to the El Centro Airport, connect to LAX, and I'm off to China or Russia or whatever. Interestingly, the only two places of the tens of thousands, towns and cities I've been in, and hundreds I've lived in for small stints, the only two places are Slab City and Iquitos, Peru. Iquitos, Peru is at the headwaters of the Amazon, and it's interesting in the same way that Slab City is because it's lawless. There's always something happening. You can step outside in Iquitos into the jungle or Slab City in the desert, and something will happen to you. We're going to cut here just a minute while I... Okay, that's good for here.
That's all the media?
I'm trying to think of some anecdotes to spruce it up, but I wanted to get that in because people will watch it, and it's surprising a media will watch it and then they'll come in. They'll key off on the El Centro Airport, and that segment, if people watch your video, will bring more and more media here.
Okay.
People start to associate me with the media, and that means I don't get many dates, partly out of their choice and out of mine of being a recluse. I don't have any tattoos to speak of that I want to show. I don't have a prison record. I've been in 3 jails, LA County, Minneapolis, and Broward County in Florida. But unless you have some tattoos and war stories of prisons and can say you've been in and out of that, but girls just don't go for you that much. However, when I started relating to the media, everybody wants to be on film. So I started to I got one date, to be honest. One night at the music range, I met a very pretty, shapely lass. We had some banter, and the next day I went to where she was staying at the internet cafe, and she had some tattoos on her face. I wasn't quite sure if they were temporary or permanent, and she had a habit of shooting meth, which wasn't a problem with me. And she was fairly incapacitated to the state that she needed her urine bottles emptied. So I started going over every 3 days and emptying her urine bottles and listening to her stories, her war stories of prisons and on the road and so forth. Finally, after about a week, she stretched her back and said, "I'm so sore," and she took off her shoes. In one of the shoes was a rug blade for her own protection, she said. And then she dropped her pants and her shirt and was down to her panties and her brassiere, and I ended up massaging her, starting from top to bottom, worked my way down to her panties, and they were removed, as well as the brassiere, and a perfect hourglass figure, until she finally said, after I massaged for a couple minutes, "Well, I think I'll turn over now." And she did, and I looked down at that same perfect figure and gazed, and she said, "Just my luck, a scientist." And I said, well, that's interesting. One diminished testicle, an infantile penis, and a small vulva. She wasn't a transgender, she was born that way. I can't remember the scientific name she gave, but she said, this probably isn't going to work out, is it? And I said, no, it isn't, but I'll keep emptying your urine bottles. The more interesting facet was she had in her underwear a hem, a wire wrapped round and round and round, about 6 layers. And it was either, she was either wired for sound or it was a garrote to strangle a person. I never had a second date with her to find out. Okay. This one is